Disney Investor Day happened recently. Well, recently being when I started this, and a whole bunch of new projects were announced. I could talk about any of the individual new projects, or the lack of new original content in the announcements. I could also bring up the lack of known queer content. Or the fact that they decided that Rosario Dawson was good enough to play Ahsoka in a show she leads, which she is not. Who saw her performance in The Mandalorian and actually thought that But instead, I want to talk about my reaction to the Falcon and the Winter Soldier trailer. Which was surprise. Surprise that I'm actually invested in what's going to happen with Bucky. Despite my years on Tumblr, I have never really been obsessed with this tier of Tumblr white boy. Even with a cool concept and Sebastian Stan being a good actor, I could just never really get into his character. Or at least get as obsessed with him as the rest of the internet did. It wasn't until literally the last 5 minutes of Endgame that I found myself invested in what was going to happen next with Bucky. And I decided to figure out why this was. What did I miss that 80% of the people I followed on Tumblr didn't? Why didn't I like Bucky? I'm only going to talk about the MCU version of Bucky, as I have only read the start of Ed Brubaker's run on Captain America, and the only other thing I've seen him in is Avengers Earth's Mightiest Heroes. God, that show was so good. I'm gonna rewatch it later. I'm also going to be doing my best to keep my thoughts on Bucky and not the movies themselves. Emphasis on doing my best because I might have ADD. I really hope that the conclusion that I come to isn't that everyone just found Sebastian Stan really hot and I, a lesbian, just missed it for that reason. Otherwise, this is going to be a waste of everyone's time. Let's get started. This movie is actually semi-decent, even if the action scenes aren't at the best, and any scene that cuts to the villains kind of bored me. Overall, most of this movie is pretty forgetful, unless it's a scene involving Peggy Carter. God, I love her! Oh my god, she deserves so much better than the MCU, and this is why she got her own spin-off, which should have gone on for... After I watched this movie the first time, I pretty much forgot about him. I don't fully remember where my brain was at 14, but I do remember knowing nothing about his comic book counterpart and not being interested enough to Google him. But how does Bucky hold up now? Bucky first appears to the audience after he saves Steve from getting beat up. Again. Apparently this happens a lot. He doesn't come off as super important at first, gives off a I could die at any time and the audience wouldn't care vibe. He then decides that he and Steve need to take some girls out on some dates before he gets shipped off to the front lines.
I don't see what the problem is. You're about to be the last eligible man in New York. You know, there's 3.5 million women here.
Oh, that was so heterosexual, Buck. Are you okay? Are you oppressed in the 1940s? How much of it are you faking? Is that why you didn't go back at the end of Endgame? Although he does end up paying more attention to Steve than his nameless dates, and seems rather overprotective of him. It was somewhere in all of this that I started to question if I was going to start caring about Bucky on this rewatch. This would really throw some holes in my plans for this video. After Steve becomes a full-blown himbo, the next time we hear about Bucky is that he's possibly dead. Then Steve is motivated to do things, and oh, that's why Bucky exists. Bucky is a plot device in this movie. I'm not wrong. If Bucky didn't yell at Steve at the fair, Steve wouldn't have been spotted by the doctor for the experiment, and then if Bucky hadn't gotten kidnapped, Steve wouldn't be in the army. So Steve is able to find Bucky.
Smaller.
Look, I'm not a Stucky shipper, but if you don't think that this repressed gay didn't want a slice of beefcake for a second there, you are lying to yourself. I did enjoy their best bro back and forths here. I think if people talked about this version of Bucky more, then maybe I would have gotten why people liked him so much a lot sooner. But there's a limited screen time with this version of him. When he's just a casual dude with his bro, I think it's great. I love it. More of this, please. Bucky's final scene of the movie is when they capture Zemo on the train. I love this little moment right here.
Remember when I made you ride the Cyclone at Coney Island?
Yeah, and I threw up?
This isn't payback, is it?
Now, why would I do that?
I don't know, it's just something best friends do. Call back to stupid shit they've done together. When they're getting on the train, they're immediately separated, but when they're back together, they get some in-sync fighting. It's so hard to talk about Bucky as an individual in this movie. He's just so much of an extension of Steve. But then Bucky falls off the train. But he can't die, right? That's like killing Rhodey. Iron Man didn't do that, so I would. Oh no. I saw Avengers first, so it wasn't like we were gonna see him again anyways. Also, most of the audience not familiar with the comics would have no idea that Bucky comes back to life later. So unless you got really attached really fast, this doesn't leave much of an impact other than, oh, poor Steve. After this film, I am still not getting the Bucky obsession. But the internet's obsession with him didn't happen because of this movie, so that's fine. There was just a lot of stuff happening in what is actually a relatively simple film, so it's easy for Bucky to get lost in all of that. It's easy to forget that he was even in the movie unless you really liked the movie or went back and watched it several times. Or just really liked his comic book counterpart. Or are at least familiar with him. Next. This movie is considered one of the best superhero movies of all time, and I can't believe I forgot how good it is! I did not appreciate this movie enough when it first came out. Sam Wilson is the best addition to the MCU and is probably my favorite character in it. This man is underappreciated by the fandom, and I'm glad people are starting to recognize that. This rewatch made me a Roman Odger shipper of all things, and I'm actually mad about that because now the Age of Ultron romance is even worse in my eyes. Can't believe I want to promote heterosexuality in this video, I'm so sorry. The Peggy scene made me cry, and Steve probably needs therapy. I pretty much knew what I was feeling about Bucky when I watched this film for the first time. Well, time to see what all the hype's about. The first thing we see of Bucky is when Steve goes to his own museum exhibit and sees that Bucky is mentioned and gets his own little section. This scene emphasizes that we're only going to see Bucky from Steve's point of view for most of his time in the MCU. Next time we see Bucky is the first time he tries to kill Fury. Okay, if this moment was the only reason that people were obsessed with Bucky, I would get it. I would so get it, because that was cool as hell. Bucky actually has some great action scenes, and this should be the reason people are so obsessed with him. Even him being mysterious and cool and kind of sexy in the rooftop scene. Superficial stuff like that being the reason people are so obsessed, I get. But those aren't the reasons, and I know this because I've seen a lot of meta essays on his character. Where are these about my boy Sam Wilson? And then there's also the walk, which I think was 80% of the appeal. I'm assuming this based on the number of times it appeared on my dashboard. Then at the end of the fight, it's revealed that Bucky is the Winter Soldier. This was spoiled by the press tour, the posters, and by anyone who got curious and looked up who the Winter Soldier was in the comics. Look, you can't look up the plot of MCU movies for the comics because they change everything, but you can still get spoilers. Steve blames himself, and continues to need therapy. Seriously, someone give him therapy. I will say that blaming himself for bad things that happen to Bucky is at least a consistent character trait. The transition of who is this hot, sexy, mysterious assassin to I now have sympathy because he's Cap's brainwashed best friend that he thought was dead is handled pretty well. Look at his sad puppy dog eyes. Don't you just want to hug him and make him some hot chocolate? Still focused on Steve though. That really is the only thing tying him to the present though. Seriously, what else would he focus on? Sam and his perfectness as the best MCU character? He should, but that doesn't make any narrative sense right now. Now we see Steve thinking about Bucky. What I've discovered is that the audience cares about Bucky because Steve cares about Bucky. And we care about Steve because he's the main character and he was written so that we would like him. So we care about Bucky by association and not really as an individual. Sam then tries to bring Steve back to reality by knowing that you can't save everyone. Because Sam Wilson is the only person in this whole universe who has a realistic idea of what will most likely happen. But Steve's gonna be a stubborn idiot and still fight for his BFF if he has to. Don't ruin his hopes and dreams, Sam! Steve is confronted by Bucky because he's still controlled by Hydra, and while they fight, Steve tries to appeal to Bucky's humanity and— oh my god! I just realized why this fight is here! It's so that there's an emotional attachment to the ending! Sure, they would have still stopped Hydra, and we would have been invested from being attached to the world and main characters, but are we actually emotionally invested in the Helicarriers? Or even S.H.I.E.L.D. for that matter? This is the emotional confrontation of the film. Steve saving the future by fighting what's left of his past. Steve simultaneously fighting to save the world and the one person he has from before who doesn't even know him. Why is this movie so good? Okay, I actually think I understand why people liked Bucky so much in the second half of this fight. This is where the true ooh-woo part of the fandom came in. It's the inner turmoil. The part of himself that is fighting to come free of his mind control and torture. That's what got them.
Because I'm with you to the end of the line.
Okay, this line should have probably been in the first Avenger. I'm sorry, it's my one problem with this film, and really it's a problem with the first film and them not planning out all the movies. The flashback scene should have been there after Bucky falls off the train and Steve is mourning him. I also think it would have made more of an emotional impact in the first film and make people more attached to Bucky. Bucky's story ends with him pulling Steve out of the water and going on the run. We don't know where he is, but we do know that Steve and Sam are going to try and find him. We get a last shot of himself looking at his bio in the museum. Bucky is a good character in this film, and I do see why people started to like him. It's about the inner turmoil, y'all! However, Bucky actually ends up being the least interesting part of the movie. There's too many good parts, and while Bucky isn't the weakest part of the film, he's not the thing that stands out to me in it. The movie really shouldn't even be called Winter Soldier. It should have been something else, then we get a Winter Soldier movie, and then we get... Can I skip this one? I hate this movie. I believe it is one of the worst films in the MCU. There's some stuff in it I like, most of which is the action scenes and anytime Sam Wilson is on screen. 70% of the rest of the movie is just bad, and I'm not really going to go into why right now because I'm probably going to end up making a video on it at a later point, so we're just going to get to Bucky super fast. Actually, my opinion on Bucky lowers in this movie, and I just blame it on how bad this movie is. The book mind control thing is really ham-fisted and only exists so that we can have another action scene and plot point. The scene also doesn't work because we get a flashback later. I'm sorry, I know I said I wouldn't go into why I hate this movie so much, but it's just so bad. Steve is then on a mission to capture Rumlow, aka Crossbones, who mentions Bucky. This scene emphasizes that we're still going to continue seeing Bucky mostly from Steve's point of view.
Rumlow said Bucky, and all of a sudden I was a 16-year-old kid again in Brooklyn.
This is not about Bucky, Steve.
They have identified as James Buchanan Barnes, the Winter Soldier.
Oh shit, now it's about Bucky. Next time we see Bucky is when he's buying some plums. I think Bucky is legit just trying to live his life away from everything and doesn't want to get involved in Avengers stuff because either he knows it's an easy target for Hydra that way, or he just wants to live a normal life and try to fix everything he's done. If it's the second one, Bucky's not doing a very good job fixing everything he's done. So the police drop in and, aww, they still have NSYNC fighting. I'm sorry. I can't stop laughing at that. It's so fucking funny. More extended fight scene. Black Panther is there. Blah, blah, blah. Cool motorcycle scene. Yada, yada, yada. They get arrested. Zemo then has the book to mind control Bucky. Great acting from Seabass here. Sam continues to be the best and smartest character by actually trying to follow Zemo while Steve goes after Bucky. They find out about the super soldiers from Bucky after he gets out of the mind control, and they decide they need to get their shit, leading to the best scene in the movie.
Can you move your seat up?
No.
Those two lines are the reason they're getting a spin-off that I'm actually looking forward to. We get to the airport, and I really like the Spidey versus Sam Bucky fight. I just like every scene that Sam is in, we've established that, and he brings out things I do like about Bucky. Also love that Sam has known Bucky for less than 8 hours and already has a fully formed opinion of him. They're like two people who share a best friend. Why am I saying like? They're two people who share a best friend, but absolutely hate each other, so do end up having to constantly hang out till they end up with a begrudging friendship. It's great. Disney also needs to stop being a coward and let them make out. So after another superhero fight, we get to Siberia and the revelation that Bucky killed Tony's parents. This is also one of my least favorite moments right here. My issue isn't that Tony fires on Bucky. He has a reasonable, albeit over-the-top response to finding out who killed his mom. I don't like Bucky and Steve's response being that they immediately need to fight this guy. Bucky doesn't even say anything afterwards, he just fights and runs. Bucky should be showing some kind of remorse for what he did, but oh my god, he doesn't! And he does feel bad. He feels like a bad person for everything he did. This is established literally only a few scenes earlier. But they don't let this happen because they need another action scene, even though we've already had our big battle scene, plus 100 other ones, and this movie is such a mess. God! There's actually a how it should have ended where this happens. I don't think it would play out entirely that way, but still, it's better than what actually happened. So they defeat Iron Man, and this has no consequences on the MCU as a whole. Bucky ends the movie not trusting himself and asking to be put back under the ice until he's sure that they can get the Hydra brainwashing out of him. Aw, what a good being who wants to keep people safe. Why did the fandom never focus on this aspect of him? It's because they were too busy shipping him with Steve, wasn't it? I think my feelings on this film are just way too negative to determine if I actually like or dislike Bucky in it. The only thing I know for sure is that I love every scene he has with Sam, and I like that he does want to protect people. Now let's get me away from this movie before I have to change the title of this video to Civil War is Garbage, and here's why. I refuse to rewatch this movie. The title is a lie, and I hate that. Bucky doesn't do a lot in this. He's there for less than 5 minutes. He gets a new arm. Doesn't really do anything that makes me like him more. But I'm glad he's there. For this scene, and this scene alone.
How much for the gun?
Not for sale.
Okay, how much for the arm? Oh, I'll get that arm.
This is one of the 2 stupid hopes that I had for this movie. The other one didn't happen because Benedict Cumberbatch hates me specifically. I also understood Stucky shippers for a moment.
Steve?
Those poor bitches. Alright, last one. I don't have that much time off of work, and I'm not wasting it rewatching Bucky for his less than 5 minutes of screen time for the second movie in a row. Luckily, YouTube people are great and I can just watch clips there. Probably could have done that for the other movies, but Bucky was in too much of them and I didn't want to look up every individual clip. After the battle, which Bucky doesn't make much of an impact on, we go to Tony's funeral, which Bucky is attending. That's just gotta be super awkward. Seriously, think about that. You killed a guy's parents while mind-controlled, and before he found out about that, you had never said 5 words to the guy. Like, oh my god, why did they invite Bucky? You also can't argue that it's because Bucky needs to be there when Steve leaves, because I'm pretty sure they did that on a different day. Also, even if it was the same day, Bucky could have just arrived later. He could have waited in the car. They then do something that I wish they had done in Winter Soldier, which is have a callback to a previous film and not just shoehorn a scene where they say it.
Don't do anything stupid till I get back.
How can I? You're taking all this stupid with you.
I then understand Stucky shippers for a few seconds.
Gonna miss you, buddy.
Holy shit. Bucky fucking knew. How did I miss this? Bucky knew that Steve wasn't coming back. I can't believe I had to have that confirmed word of God out there somewhere when it was so obvious. I'm an idiot. Then Steve doesn't come back and Bucky sees an older version of him in the distance. And he calls Sam over, foreshadowing the Falcon and the Winter Soldier.
Go ahead.
And for some reason, right here was where I thought, huh, I'm actually interested in Bucky as a character now. So what was it about the rest of the films that couldn't make me like Bucky? Well, I think it really comes down to 2 things. First of all, Bucky was never his own character. He was always an extension of Steve. Most of his time in the MCU is either spent with Steve or seen from Steve's perspective. Bucky, in a sense, is always an extension of Steve, more so than any of the other supporting characters. You can separate characters like Natasha, Sharon, Peggy, and Sam, a character who is literally introduced in the sequel while running next to Steve, from Steve himself. But it's a lot harder to do so with Bucky, considering that most of his scenes where he's away from Steve are either off-screen or when he's brainwashed. It's really hard for me to like a character who only exists or is seen through the perspective of one other person. It's probably why I like his scenes with Sam so much. And the second reason, he always ends up being the least interesting part of the movie that he's in. I mean it, guys, even the movie with his name in the title. Every movie he's in, it's pretty much like this. Why would I pay attention to Bucky when Peggy Carter is right there? Why would I pay attention to Bucky when all of S.H.I.E.L.D. has collapsed, Natasha is showing more of a fun side to her character, and Sam Wilson is right there? Why would I think about Bucky when there's people with interesting powers and there's meant to be a political intrigue? Also, why would I want to watch this movie again? Why would I want Bucky to be in Black Panther? Why am I concerned about Bucky when, holy shit, they got Spider-Man? Who cares about Bucky when I'm never going to see half the original Avengers again? I'm not saying Bucky isn't interesting or compelling. This rewatch made me see some of the reasons people liked him so much. His epic action scenes, the more bro-y scenes he has with Steve, the inner turmoil. He's got a cool concept and is interesting, it's just that he's constantly in movies with characters and concept that are more interesting than he is. I think he works better in more grounded stories, which is why he worked so well in Winter Soldier, and I think having another more grounded MCU movie would have helped his character. Instead, it's war movie, spy movie, Avengers 2.5, oh hey look, we're fighting aliens, oh fuck, that's a lot of people. That's not a good natural progression. The only one that worked was First Avenger to Winter Soldier, and even then he's still the least interesting part of First Avenger and on the lower end in Winter Soldier. This moment in Endgame that made me more interested in Bucky as a character going forward is pretty much the opposite of the two major problems that I had with him. With Steve gone, Bucky doesn't have to be an extension of him, and we can see him from outside the nostalgia-based perception that Steve had of him. It's also that with the Falcon and the Winter Soldier, they're going to be with a more grounded series. There's less of a chance for him to be overshadowed by every other character. Everything stated in this video has been my opinion or personal experience. Feel free to express your own in the comments down below. Don't forget to also like and subscribe, as well as support me on Ko-fi and other social media. Did you guys get the Bucky hype? Have you always been on the Bucky hype? Are you never going to be on the Bucky hype? Just let me know. All links are in the description down below, and I will see you all next time.